you for being here this morning. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me to this important conference in India. I come from Ecuador, and today I'm going to talk about food safety and traceability, which are inevitable issues in the global shrimp trade. This is the outline of the presentation. I'm going to talk about the global context of the shrimp trade and some regulations about seafood, food safety standards and trade, and also what is Ecuador doing about it. This is a map from Rabobank. You can see the global seafood trade around the world. Look please at the orange lines. From India, the product is going to US, Europe, and also China. And from Ecuador, the line is also going, a huge line to India mainly, to China, sorry, and also to Europe and the United States. That is a very complicated illustration, but you can see how the seafood is moving around the world. So we have to comply some standards on trade and food security. This is the representation of the top 10 exporters and importers. If you can see, sorry, something is happening in the back.
I'm extremely sorry for the disturbances, ma'am. Dear audience, kindly be seated. Please maintain silence. We request you all to kindly maintain the decorum of the hall. We kindly request you all to be seated. Please do cooperate with us. Please maintain the decorum of the hall. It's a humble request. Please be seated.
Okay. These are the main exporters in the world. If you see in value, India is in the 4th place, and Ecuador is in the 10th. And also about the importers, the main importers in the world are Europe, US, Japan, and China. This is updated to 2017, so probably now India is the biggest importer of seafood in the world. So we have to comply with some food standards for trading the shrimp in the world. Food standards and trade go hand in ensuring safe, nutritious, and sufficient food for a growing world population. Trade in food is difficult to imagine without standards. So food standards give confidence to consumers in the safety, quality, and authenticity of what they eat. If every government applies different food standards, trade is more difficult, costly, to ensure that food is safe and meet the consumer's expectations. So for that, there are 2 organizations involved in the food trade. The World Trade Organization, which is the sole global organization to deal with the rules to trade between nations, and the members come together to negotiate the rules, which takes the form of trade agreements adopted by consensus. There are 2 trade agreements, the more important for the food, which are the SPS and TBT. The agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, the SPS, concerns the application of food safety and animal and plant health regulations. And the technical barriers to trade, the TBT agreement, aims to ensure that technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures are non-discriminatory and do not create unnecessary obstacles to trade. The other important regulation is the Codex Alimentarius, but FAO and the World Health Organization. The code forms a global rule book that everyone in the food chain can follow. It is a compilation of harmonized international food standards, guidelines, and codes of practices, aimed to protect consumer health and promote fair practices in the food trade. So these standards, guidelines, and codes of practice are advisory in nature. The countries must voluntarily translate them into national legislation and regulations. So that's why every country has their sanitary regulations, the controls, the institutions in charge of the sanitary authority, certifications and testing. When a country applies the Codex standards and engages with the SPS and TBT agreements, it contributes towards safeguarding public health and seizing international trade opportunities. Successful participation is based on sound knowledge and capacities in food safety and standards. Commitment to and consistent investment in continuously improving food control systems are fundamental for all the countries that are trading food around the world. There is a huge problem with the food security. It's the food fraud. It's the deliberate substitution, addition, adulteration, or misrepresentation of food or food ingredients for economic gain. Food fraud can be a threat to food safety or negatively impact the nutrition status of already vulnerable populations. We have some issues with residues in heavy metals, antibiotics, or the amount of bacteria in the food. That's why food standards must be complied for the trade. It's a big problem, $52 billion yearly according Oceana, and when there is an opportunity and economic motivation and lack of control measure, there is a big vulnerability for food fraud. When this occurs, all downstream stakeholders in the supply chain immediately lose all the trust in the authenticity of the food, and trade can be frozen almost instantly. When there is a problem with the sanitary regulation, prices drop and the market is closed to the supplier. Strong standards for authenticity that are regularly enforced through the entire value chain help to prevent the occurrence of such events. How to avoid it? You can see the food fraud can be substitution, dilution, unapproved substances, mislabeling, and some other options. We need to implement a very strong food safety and quality management system, which include many activities, but I put in red the more important. Suppliers and raw material must be approved. There is a need of record control. You need a food safety manual. You need to implement a traceability system, and you also require a quality manual to know what are the controls in every step of the food chain. So let's talk about traceability. Traceability is an important component of food safety management strategy along value chains. However, in many developing countries, the fragmentation of supply chains creates significant challenges to achieving a traceability. When there are too many actors in the food chain, traceability could be a problem because we cannot track all the steps. And there is too much people involving in this process, and you need too much records. So if you see the scheme, you have to track the product from the farm, you see the shrimp, to the processor, the transport, the storage, and the final market. You have to be able to track forward and down. So you need an inspection based on food, risk-based. Includes facility inspection, verification, compliance with established good practice, and end product sampling. That's why for all the food, you need to sample the final product, and you need to test the quality of that product. Diagnostic capacity is recognized as a key element of compliance infrastructure. You need a very good capacity of diagnosis and testing. There are some regulations for shrimp trade. I'm just going to take two examples, Europe and US. We are the very important markets. And I'm going to just talk about food safety and traceability requirements in those markets. For Europe, the Europe General Food Law entered into force in 2002 and made traceability compulsory, which is an obligation for all food and feed businesses. It requires that all food and feed operators implement a special traceability systems for every country, for every supplier, for every processor. There is a part of the regulation, it says traceability of food-producing animals and any other substance intending to be or expected to be incorporated into a food or feed shall be established at all stages of production, processing, and distribution. The legislation is too long. This is just an example, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But there are some steps. The food and feed businesses have to identify and document information on products one step forward and one step back. That means if you're a farmer, you need information about your food supplier, your seed supplier, and all the inputs that you are including in your farm. You need to record, you need to maintain this information for the authorities or for the audits. If you are a processing plant, you need to know who is your raw material supplier, where the shrimp was harvested, if they use some additive or special treatment in the production, so you need to keep this record and you need to test the substances in that product. And you have to inform all of this in the label for the final consumer. The member states of the authorities have to monitor production, processing, and distribution of food and feed products to ensure that the operators have traceability system in place. That's why the sanitary authorities have to visit the farms or the processor and have to audit the quality controls and have to test the final product before harvest or before shipping. And the markets or the countries have to establish sector-specific legislation on traceability as appropriate. This is another example about the controls of traceability in the United States, which is another important market for shrimp exporters. There is a SIMP, the Seafood Import Monitoring Program, which was in place since last year. It is a risk-based traceability program requiring to U.S. importers of record to provide and report key data from the point of harvest to the point of entry to the United States. Commerce on 13 imported fish and fish products identified as vulnerable to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing or seafood fraud. Mostly in shrimp is because of the use of antibiotic or some other residues or for the mislabeling in some other products. There are some important requirements for the U.S. market, evidence of authorization of the fish or the permit or license number, that is the number of the establishment that every sanitary authority in the country gives to every farm or processor, the name of the farm of aquaculture facility where the product comes from. You also need to report the area of wild capture or aquaculture harvest. You have to inform about the product form and weight at the time of landing. And also the name and contact information of the entity and facility to which the fish was first landed or delivered. This is information for the markets, but needs to be recorded for the importer, and the processor and farmer need to give this information. This is the form for the SIMP monitoring program. You have to put some information about the facility number, authorization, the location of the aquaculture facility, the name of the processor and the establishment, and some other, some other information that is compulsory for the United States. So, what happened with, we can comply all these requirements if we have a very good quality control system and a very strong traceability system to ensure the product to the market. We can use this as a strange for trade. I'm going to show a little about the case of Ecuador regarding the traceability system and the quality control, which for us is a good tool for market promotion. We have a national control plan, which is the regulation that describes all the protocols applied by the government to do health checks on fisheries and aquaculture products. The national control plan is mandatory for all the establishment in the seafood chain, fish and shrimp. The main objective of this plan is provide official guarantees about quality control of the product, which are required by the importing countries, mostly related to the food safety regulation, but also environmental, labor, and some other social concerns. The key for the success of the National Control Plan is the traceability system. The information must be registered and recorded by every establishment and must be kept in every step. This is the value chain of the shrimp in Ecuador, and you can see the feed miles that provide feed to broodstock maturation, hatcheries, and farms. You can see also on the bottom the suppliers, and you can see the seed moves to the hatcheries and goes to the farms and to the processor before end in the final market. And the traceability system is applied in every step of the chain. The feed miles must record the load, the raw material, additives, and premixes used for the food. The broodstock maturation, hatcheries, and farms needs to keep records about the animal source, the food, the veterinary products, additives, the source of water, the health plan. Everything must be recorded. And this information goes to the processing plant step by step, and finally the market knows about the lot, the product, the species, the country of origin, the processor, and any additive used in the process. So if there is any problem in the final market, you can go back in the chain to look the information and solve the problem. How Ecuador used this strange as a market strategy? Ecuador launched in 2017 a new initiative which is called SSP, Sustainable Shrimp Partnership, which is mainly the most important part in this Sustainable Shrimp Partnership is the traceability system, the non-use of antibiotic, and the neutral impact on water. How we can prove this? Only because we have to keep records. We have to test along the chain. We have to audit all the process in the farms and the processor to demonstrate that we are complying with these standards. The farmer have to get first the ASC certification before go to the SSP program, but the most important part is the traceability system. In this case, Ecuador has implemented the traceability blockchain with the IBM for trust, which means that all the information from the farm, processor, store goes to the final consumer with a QR code or some kind of application in the mobile phone. And if you are going to buy this product, you can know where the shrimp was farmed, harvested, the time of the day, the location, and some other important information about what are you eating. And finally, the consumer could enjoy a good product, safe and complying with all the trade requirements. As some conclusions, I have some information. We cannot deny that trade in seafood products offers a way for farmers, processors, and traders in developing countries to increase their profit and improve the quality of their lives. But despite this potential, they face many challenges. Limited capacity to meet the food safety requirements is often the major obstacle, especially in countries when there are too many actors in the value chain. Domestic seafood regulations should ensure that standards are based on risk analysis using the best, most up-to-date and robust scientific advice. We need to do research, we need to test, we need to try to improve the practices. Legislation should also ensure consistency between domestic and international standards in order to facilitate the trade. It's not a good idea that domestic regulations are very weak when international regulations are very strong. And it's not fair that our own people is eating a less quality food that we are selling to the foreigners. A new type of challenges inevitably arise. Better preparation and increasing engagement will help members pick up the signals and find solutions that achieve food safety and nutrition objectives while facilitating trade. I'm going to take some words of your Honorable Vice President yesterday. He told India still has a huge potential in seafood producers, but also has a huge responsibility to supply seafood products to local and foreign consumers. Safe. The product must be safe. Quality controls and traceability are inevitable requirements for trade, so the country must remain prepared in the ongoing effort to keep food safe and nutritious. Strong institutions will be required, both in the public and private sector. Not is only about the controls or the authority, it's also about the responsibility of the food producer and processor. What are we doing in the farm every day is very important to assure the success. Otherwise, it won't work. That's all.